Welcome everyone to today's webinar on credentialing for humanist chaplains, or however else you may identify. I know I'm not trying to pigeonhole everybody into that one category, but unaffiliated chaplains, we might say. My name is Michael Skaggs. I'm Director of Programs for the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. Let me say a few words on behalf of the lab, and then we'll get started. First, like almost all of our events, this is being recorded, and so you'll get a link to that here in the next couple of days. You can always go back and watch it again. If you need to leave early, you want to come back to a point, you always have access to it. Second, you'll also have a chance to fill out a very brief survey about your experience here. That helps us plan for future events that respond to what you want to know about, so please just take 30 seconds or so to fill that out. And then finally, I want to thank the Religious Naturalist Association for sponsoring today's webinar. You can learn more at religiousnaturalism.org, and I encourage you to do so if you're thinking about pursuing chaplaincy. Now let me introduce today's guest, and I'll hand it to him. As you have questions that come up, use the Q&A function in Zoom, if you would please, instead of chat. Sometimes things kind of disappear in chat, but if you put them in Q&A, I can keep them right in front of me. Joel Nightingale Burning is a manager in the Pastoral Care and Education Department at New York Presbyterian Hospital, where he has been a hospital chaplain since 2010. He is board certified with APC and has served on its board of directors and commission on certification. He supervises CPE as a certified educator of ACPE, and his research has focused on overcoming communication barriers to spiritual care. Joel, thank you once more for joining us, and I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Michael. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm not supposed to be able to see the people.
Yeah, sorry, no, this is the webinar function, not meeting. So we're all faceless, but we are all here.
Okay, I'll just talk to myself. Yes, welcome. So our topic today is credentialing for chaplains who are, like, I'm calling it, like, relatively unaffiliated with religion per se for a chaplain. Make it really, really broad. I'm speaking to this, yes, my background, what Michael said. I got my Master of Divinity at Union Theological Seminary, where I wrote my thesis about being what I called secular but not shallow, a thesis about non-religious participants in interreligious dialogue and professional chaplaincy. I teach a chaplaincy course at Union now with a lot of support in the background from the lab. Yeah, I wanted to say a little bit more about my own background for a second, but that's not, like, the main topic. It's not my story. If you want to hear, like, my story around especially endorsement, there is another Chaplaincy Innovation Lab video that's I think it's called it's part of the Field Guide series. I think it might be called Endorsement Beyond Tradition.
Yep, I'll link it here in chat here in just a second.
Okay, cool. That's me. I remember that it was very meaningful to me because we did it from, like, the hospital room on the day of the birth of my youngest child, and it's kind of fun. And I tell more of my story there. But the short version is, relative to this topic, is that I grew up in Portland, Oregon, understanding myself to be Jewish and half Christian and secular, non-religious, and in that context, that was like a totally normal combo. It was really unremarkable. And I did religious studies in college, ended up at Union, which led me to CPE, which led me to chaplaincy. And I found myself, not so much spiritual, but not religious, but something like ministerial or pastoral, but not religious. I just became really passionate about spiritual care, even though I was still relatively unaffiliated in terms of religion. And as I went forward in the process, I felt like there was kind of a presumption that you're sort of supposed to, or what would happen, or what should happen, is that you're going to go deeper into your Jewish heritage or become Christian per se and draw on that. But I was honestly drawing, as much or more on, like, poetry, Albert Camus, religious naturalism. Our sponsor today ended up being my endorser, the Religious Naturalist Association. Even, like, baseball. I could keep going, and you'd really know all my weirdnesses, but it just wasn't texture of my spiritual life and my way of trying to be in touch with what's sacred, as far as I understand it, just wasn't making me more religious in a way that was going to make it easier for me to get endorsed or get taken seriously as a chaplain. So this was just what I want to mention. But yeah, I'll leave my own story there for now. Other sort of boundaries, just to limit my scope a little bit before I really jump into what I want to talk about, is just to be clear, like I don't speak for the APC or BCCI or for ACPE, even though I have certifications with those groups. I don't have any formal leadership role in any of those. But by the same token, it's that ecosystem along with the strategic partners, Neshama, NACC. That's really the credentialing process that I know and can speak to. So that's not the only credentialing process out there. I have a lot of respect for and indebtedness to especially George Hanzo and other people who helped set up the Spiritual Care Association. If you want to have a second webinar and more like alternative credentialing processes or other ones, go for it. That sounds great. I just don't know enough to speak to that. So I'll kind of speak. I'll speak mostly to BCCI certification. Also, there's all sorts of interesting academic and analytical issues in how to even define the topic for today. Like Michael was already saying, like we don't even sure what label to call it: humanist, non-religious, unaffiliated. Like the Religious Naturalist Association, naturalist. But I'm not going to try to parse all those differences out. You also could argue about like, should we still use the word chaplain? And, is it a fair fight even if we center spirituality? But I'm not here to advocate for anything. I'm not looking for unaffiliated chaplains to take over. I don't think the future is humanist chaplains or something. I think that those of us who are sort of relatively unaffiliated in terms of religion per se, and still practice as chaplains, like we're equally, we're not like any better, but I don't think we're any worse either than other chaplains. Equally ridiculous, equally noble. So there are all kinds of interesting proposals out there, get rid of endorsement altogether, don't use the word chaplain anymore. I'm not really going to get into that. I just want you to know the current state of affairs. My goal here, is to give information, because my sense is that people who are relatively unaffiliated and heading into chaplaincy think that the barriers are a lot higher than they actually are. I guess that's the thesis of this talk. So I want to show there are barriers, but there are also more and more ways around them, under them, over them. So that's what we're going to talk about. So what's required to become a board certified chaplain? What aspects of those requirements are particularly challenging for relatively unaffiliated chaplains? And what resources can help those chaplains overcome those challenges? What's required to become a board certified chaplain? What about that is particularly hard for unaffiliated chaplains? And how can we overcome that? So there are basically 5 requirements for board certification. I will put them just kind of like as headings in the chat. You need graduate education, endorsement, clinical education, professional experience, sort of. And then there's the essays and interview itself, which all go directly to your competencies as a chaplain. So we'll just go through each of these for a few, I don't know how long this will take exactly, unpack each of these, and then we'll just have time for questions. So, in terms of graduate education, for full board certified chaplain status through BCCI, the basic requirement would be typically 3 full-time years of graduate school. So that the Master of Divinity is the typical main kind of degree that it's all built around. At this point, it's got to be, they call it 70, I'm looking on it right here. So total of 72 semester credits or 108 quarter credits. So let me just give you the source I'm talking off of too, because this information may change over time, but the source of it probably won't as much. So I'm putting in a chat the link for APC's, BCCI's link about, how to get certified. And another good resource within there that you have to poke around a little bit for is like the certification manual per se itself. That's got all the nitty gritty. if you look in there, you see it's this basically supposed to be a 3-year full-time degree. So and it's been MDiv is the basic one. So so we're going to ask for each of these. How's that a barrier for unaffiliated chaplains? Well, Master of Divinity. So I mean, at least for me, I loved religious studies. I was really into it, passionate about it. But I didn't have any thought of going to graduate school at a seminary. Maybe it would do like academic religious studies, but I was more headed towards, I don't know, a couple other career ideas. But I had a advisor who convinced me to try one of these liberal seminaries. Think about going to divinity school, and it kind of convinced me to do that. Once I got there, I found there's a lot there. I really had a great time at Union, but yeah, it's the model is still more like the model for the education of basically Protestant clergy. So if you depart from that, you're kind of going against the grain. But the hope is, or way around this barrier, is to notice that in the latest requirements for board certification, the degree that you get, it definitely doesn't have to be a Master of Divinity per se. It could be in any, I'm cutting and pasting right from the requirements here, it'd be in theology, philosophy, or psychology. They've broadened the fields that it can draw from, and each of those those have a lot of subfields. And even if that's not broad enough to help you find something that you could study or did study that meaningfully informs your chaplaincy, there is an equivalency process per se. So this is going to come up again with endorsement. Equivalency process is you put in an application, you're basically saying, like, I have something that's equivalent to the requirement, but it doesn't not the requirement. It's not the what's the word? Not the typical way of meeting the requirement, but I have a way of meeting it. And if you look again on that second link I put, that's the certification manual. Maybe better. Michael, what's like screen sharing, walking around the website? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's fine. Let me know if it won't let you screen share, and we'll get you set
No,
up.
let's do this. Easier than just putting links in the chat.
There we go.
Yeah, you can see this, and you can see my mouse.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. Don't judge me. I don't actually use Microsoft Edge here. I'm a Firefox guy, but we're doing what we can. Okay, so
Healthcare.
all right. So anyway, so when you get on the AP Chaplains, APC's website here, BCCI certification. And if you go into the certification manual, for those of us who are weird, maybe is this the best term? You're gonna have to look in here to find all the details, and that helps you find, for example, certification equivalencies for education. Graduate education is usually in the fields of religious, spiritual, theological, and it gives kind of a lot of the typical historical fields. But again, they have expanded it to theology, philosophy, or psychology. And if you wanted to try to, if you had a different degree and you wanted to try to add up stuff like continuing education, other coursework, additional CPE, mentored education, professional experience itself, publishing and teaching in the field, there are a lot of ways to try to make up if you don't have a 3-year degree, especially a 3-year MDiv per se. There's a lot of paths to still try to get the graduate education that's required, or if you already have it, demonstrate it. And then the broadest bucket here is, see if I can find this phrase. Oops. I'm going to unshare my screen for a second here. A couple places on the BCCI website, it talks about, it has even some grounds for a wider, more expansive understanding. So I grabbed these quotes here. A graduate degree earned in another discipline will be considered and evaluated for the degree's relevance to the BCCI's professional competencies. Degrees in other fields, based on their efficacy in the work of professional chaplain, could fulfill their requirements. So Stacy Auld, who's the current chair of certification for BCCI, she wasn't able to be here today, but she told me to relay that she's available for questions and individual kind of consultations about your case. But one resource just to put the last line on this overview around the graduate education requirement is, if you're feeling stuck, not sure how to proceed relative to your graduate education because you don't have a Master of Divinity, you're not going to get one. There are options you might not be aware of. And there's even some openings here to try to make the case for, if you have some unique, effective educational background that helps you do chaplaincy, that's just not what the typical traditional version has been. Try, speak up, go forward, make your case. Don't just assume that there's no opening for you there. More we can say about that, but I'm gonna go with the overview, and we can come back and go more in depth on graduate degree. So the second big, Stacy Auld. I am not really able to keep an eye on the chat, but I'm catching a couple of things there. So Stacy Auld is the current chair of certification, and her email address is also in the chat. And hey, she told me I could do this, so there's her email address. Endorsement. Endorsement has been a daunting barrier for relatively unaffiliated chaplains. This is kind of the definition of affiliation. There's the typical path for endorsement is to find a group who's already recognized as an endorser and win their endorsement, earn their endorsement, seek their endorsement. If you're not, you can't find a group that's already recognized, then you could try to get a group recognized, or you could apply for endorsement equivalency. So let me go through those three paths: an existing endorser, a new endorser, or equivalency. So existing endorser, there's a list. The APC office has it. Again, you could email just directly to APC. It's largely the same list of endorsers, organization to organization. And yeah, it's about 99.9% Christian groups, maybe 99% Christian groups, but it's a large list. So there's still a lot of, let's say a fair number, dozens, whatever, of other groups, Jewish groups, Buddhist groups. And there's a few that probably fit with Humanist. If we're going with the group in here, I mentioned already the Religious Naturalist Association. There's also the Humanist Society. There's also the American Ethical Union. There are others. You can look through that list, see if there's a group that you're already affiliated with that would endorse you toward board certification as a chaplain. If there is, that's the easiest path, for sure. But the other ones are not extraordinarily burdensome. They're just a little harder, a little less straightforward. So the second option is, if there's not a group on that list that you're already affiliated with that's going to endorse you to be a chaplain, then the next best option is to get a group that you are affiliated with, involved with, help them apply to be recognized as an endorser. So that used to be really terrible process, to be honest. The form that was used for that was just really narrow and kind of assumed that the group applying was probably a small church or other Christian denomination. So the language was really impenetrable for relatively unaffiliated chaplains. Also, the criteria by which they evaluated those was too opaque and too subjective. But some number of years ago, the Commission on Certification overhauled that form and the criteria against which the form was evaluated, and it's a lot better now. It's again, if I'm going back and share my screen here, on this same certification manual, this treasure trove, section 6 is about endorsement. And this first part here talks about what a group has to demonstrate in order to be recognized as an endorser. So, for example, the Religious Naturalist Association, the sponsor of this webinar, who ended up being my endorser, they weren't an endorser when I was applying for certification, but they wanted to become one, and I helped. I was kind of their link or test case or first, their guinea pig. I'm not sure what the right metaphor is. And we got them recognized. We submitted documents that met these criteria. And it's not that these are just hoops to jump through or meaningless, but most groups that are formed on the basis of some kind of spiritual purpose or community or something that would be supportive to a chaplain or help that chaplain be more sustainable and in their work can meet something like this. Just have to, you can use this. There's a really expansive definition of spirituality that can be used to meet the first criteria. Being legally incorporated is just kind of a basic safeguard. It can't be just somebody in a garage doing endorsements, for money or something. And these having systems and standards, the APC office can probably supply you with some boilerplate language that the board of your group could use to have just a basic kind of fair process. This stuff is to protect the chaplain, so it's not just an arbitrary thing where the group just gets to basically like discriminate in deciding who gets endorsed or not. No, they have to have like, open and honest, fair criteria. Unshare my screen for a second. So let's just, so if you have if you have a group that's already recognized endorser, that's the easiest. And do know that there are a few sort of humanist or non-theistic endorsing groups out there. And if you don't have that, then a group or community that you are involved with and that you do think of, hopefully with integrity, as being something that's sort of part of your functioning as a chaplain or supports your functioning as a chaplain, you could get them recognized as an endorser. The last option is if you don't have a group like that, and you're not, or the group that you have that's like that isn't going to be able to meet these requirements. It's not legally incorporated, or there's been all kinds of examples. But if you neither of those first paths work for you, then you can consider applying for an equivalency, which is again a way of kind of petitioning the boards of certification to say, hey, I meet the spirit of the requirement, even if I don't meet it in this most conventional way. And again, to share my screen off of that same certification manual, you can see what that equivalency application entails. And I think APC had a webinar about this recently that I'll try to find the link for and put in the chat here. But you basically write an essay where you follow these prompts. You name what you would consider your faith or spiritual tradition, how your tradition fits within this definition of spirituality. And of course, you may be like, well, I don't have it. Well, you probably have something, or if you don't, you just can't meet this. But if you got to find some way of understanding or construing or seeing your own experience through this lens, be able to describe some tradition that you're a part of that goes back beyond just your own life. And that can be, you can understand that a million different ways. I won't spell it out for you because it's you. You just write a few pages of this essay, and you have 2 letters of support. They aren't recommendation letters. It's a little more specific than that. 2 people whose relationships with you support your participation in whatever tradition you're talking about. It doesn't have to be that they're not like attesting to something about you. It's the idea is that you have some community. You have at least 2 people who are sort of supportive of your own investment in this tradition. So this is your last resort, but it's a really good and important one for the constituency that I think this webinar is aiming to serve. So if you want to apply for that equivalency, again, reach out to APC office, ask for it. Welcome to reach out to me. That's the, again, I won't go into the whole history of it. That's the compromise. That's where things worked out. That's the path that's open. And we hope it's spacious for you without being devoid of all meaning. Requirements for certification: graduate degree, endorsement, clinical education, professional experience, sort of, and then the actual competencies themselves. So I'm going to keep going with number 3, 4, 5, which are kind of briefer than these first 2. CPE, Clinical education, the requirement for BCCI board certification is 4 units of CPE, including at least 3 units that are through ACPE. And that presents some unique challenges to chaplains who are relatively unaffiliated, setting aside even for a second the actual work of being a chaplain, how that might be challenging for someone who's less affiliated. Being a chaplain intern comes with its own challenges. Historically, that application and admission process, it's kind of like the form I was just talking about, where there's just really densely kind of monocultural or ethnocentric. There's narrowly kind of Christian language in the materials. You could ask for a denominational reference, for example, you're required to do on the application for CPE. And then when you get into CPE, you know, some of the aspects of the training, it's all about pastoral formation, pastoral competence. You have to do theological reflection, all the stuff that may or may not be your home language as much as may not language that doesn't fit the more relatively unaffiliated chaplains as well as the, you know, more affiliated ones, or at least the Christianly affiliated ones. Anyway, so credit to ACPE and especially Joe Hirschman and this Religion and Values Task Force that got set up over the last few years as a subgroup of the ACPE's larger anti-bias work group. They went through literally all of the ACPE materials. I think like the entire accreditation manual, certification manual, all of the standards, everything, and tried to make it more inclusive of unconventional, unaffiliated, humanist, naturalist, secular sort of participants at every level. And you'll see that reflected now. So if you pull up the application for a unit of CPE, it doesn't ask you for a denominational reference to something like, you know, spiritual/values reference or something close to that. So that's the barriers there are not as bad as they were. And when it comes into doing verbatims and process group and theological reflection stuff, I would just encourage, I think the best resource is just the spirit of CPE itself at its best. Is if you have a difference, if you're different in some way, it's not working for you, or you feel unseen or marginalized, or you just got to bring that into the process and try and work with that the best you can. I would just commend, just don't necessarily give up or assume it's not going to work. There's all kinds of ways to approach a supervisor who's asking for theological reflection. There's ways to be in relationship and work, give feedback, find a way to make that, you know, just like it's like working with any kind of authority, just finding a way to work with it in a way that can help you move you forward in your own process, be authentic to you, without having to deny who you really are, your own values and stuff. I think there's more and more, there's more hope and room for that in CPE than there ever has been. Maybe not as much as there should be, but there's more than there ever has been. Graduate education, endorsement, clinical education, professional experience. So you're supposed to have 2,000 hours of post-training professional experience to be board certified. That's roughly one very full-time year of work. And yeah, that can be a barrier to certification for anyone. It's just hard to get a chaplain job. But in some ways, if we're honest, especially hard if you are weird in terms of religion. That's I feel just extremely fortunate that I had a supervisor and a mentor and some champions and people that helped me get into this field and get a job and stay involved. And I just feel fortunate, lucky, blessed. I think I'm not saying like the bias against secular people is the worst or something. I mean, and certainly in terms of any kind of like intersectional analysis, I have a lot going for me, a lot of privileges, a lot of access and power and stuff too. But there's a lot of bias against atheists in general in America, and there's a lot of people that just think it's a total oxymoron to have like a secular chaplain or a chaplain who's secular. And I stay off of it, but my friends who are more Facebook involved tell me just horror stories about what shows up on the Facebook groups of APC and presumably other groups. As soon as the idea of there being some kind of humanist chaplain comes up. So yeah, it could be a barrier to get hired. But what I would say is the workaround. So each of these, I'm trying to say, what's the current state? What are some barriers? What are some workarounds? Well, there's provisional certification. There's a way of getting certified even before you have professional experience, where if you can demonstrate the competencies, you can get certified and then make up the hours later, rack up the hours later. And once you've then worked the 2,000 hours, your provisional certification almost automatically becomes full certification. And that's a nice path for any group of people who might systemically have more trouble getting a full-time job. So for relatively unaffiliated chaplains, that's an appealing path in some ways. And I think that once you achieve board certified chaplain status, you're likely to have less trouble. That is really helpful in getting a job. And I think in at least some hiring processes, I may be too optimistic, but I think they're unlikely to try to re-adjudicate your religious background and take that more as a given once you're that you've adequately demonstrated that part of your background if you're a board certified chaplain. Last piece here. So graduate education, endorsement, clinical education, professional experience, sort of. You don't really need it to get certified, but it helps. You have to at some point, you have to rack up the hours. Then there's the competencies themselves. I mean, all of that stuff is just prerequisites. The essays that you write, the interviews itself are all trying to demonstrate certain competencies. So if I go back to the website for a second, and we're almost at the finish here, just get questions. Really hope we're on target, but you'll tell me when we get questions. So if I go back to this website, go back to becoming certified, and we look at common qualifications and competencies. This has been the language of the competencies for a while. It says hasn't been updated since 2016 or 17, but the basic structure of these competencies is a lot older than that too. These are more of the prerequisites I was talking about. The competencies themselves start here, ITP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's something like 30 some odd of them. And these are what you write. You write vignettes, you turn in clinical contact narratives, which is like a cousin of verbatims. And then you have an interview where a group of chaplains assess whether you demonstrate these competencies. So can you articulate an approach to spiritual care rooted in one's faith or spiritual tradition that is integrated with a theory of professional practice? That's 1 of 30, sorry. And can you incorporate a working knowledge of psychological and sociological discipline and so forth? Advocating for persons in one's care, establishing, deepening, and concluding professional spiritual care relationships sensitively, openly, respectfully. I won't read through all these. You can read through them on your own. But what I would lift up is that some of them are trickier than others if you're from a less conventional, less affiliated religious position. So ITP 1, look, they already changed it to some extent. I think it used to be articulate an approach to pastoral care rooted in theology. I could be wrong about that, but I think that one they already tweaked the language some. But stuff like in PPS4, you're going to have to figure out, what is it? Where's this? PPS 8, you're going to have to figure out what theological or spiritual reflection looks like from your perspective. I think pick 4, respecting the spiritual boundaries of others. Some of the ways that let's say a humanist chaplain demonstrates those, or what would be historically called pastoral authority. What does that professional authority, that chaplain authority, look like for a naturalist chaplain? I just think it looks different than, especially to the community that's interviewing you, than they may be used to. Our hope here is that the proof is in the pudding. And my recommendation with these competencies is just to try to just show your best work. That's good certification advice for anyone. But the reality is, I mean, you could say theoretically and in reality, unaffiliated chaplains are actually demonstrating all of these competencies every single day and quarterly at certification meetings. It's happening. And if you can just sort of let your game do the talking, that's your best hope. Now, the other reform that has to happen to support that, though, is on the it's in process right now. So I don't know how much you hear people who know. I happen to be part of a work group that has been constructing a rubric for these competencies. And this is the last kind of point I wanted to make is the competencies themselves have always been there's a writing guide out there that gives a little bit, unpacks them a little bit, like what does it mean to try to pick one that's like, what does it mean to incorporate a working knowledge of different ethical theories appropriate to one's professional context? It spells it out a little bit, but it's also still, the competencies are too opaque, and the evaluation of them has been too subjective. So when you show up for certification, let me scare you a little bit for a second, it kind of comes down to like, do the 3-4 random already certified chaplains who you happen to get on your committee, are you able to demonstrate providing spiritual care to persons experiencing loss and grief that coheres with their understanding of how to do that well? Not so much some objective one, but like whatever those chaplains think is good care for people in grief. That's the model that we've worked on. So in some ways, I guess it's been the best we can do. That's not totally worthless. It is, you're being evaluated by your peers or future peers on their kind of like expert opinion about what makes good work. But the way the system has been, where those standards have been very opaque, and it's sort of like you got to hope that you're legible to the people you show up to, and that your way of thinking about it makes sense to them. And you can imagine that in a million different ways, if you're just unconventional, it's going to be a lot harder for you. If you use the same terminology, the magic words that they're looking for, it's easy to pass. But if you're a little different, it can be a lot harder. So what we're trying to do is improve that with a rubric, which is to say a standardized definition of each competency and a gradient of what it looks like to meet that competency, a checklist, like an exact list of what do you have to show in order to pass. I'm just going to give you a little preview here. So for this ITP1, articulate an approach to spiritual care rooted in one's spiritual tradition with an integrated with a theory of spiritual care. So you'd have to do these 3 things. Describe the chaplain's perspective on spiritual care in terms of the chaplain's own spiritual tradition. Describe at least one theory or theorist of spiritual care that the chaplain applies in their practice, and give at least one example of the chaplain's caregiving that's congruent with that approach. Provide spiritual care that incorporates a working knowledge of the academic study of religion and spirituality. Well, you got to articulate at least one insight that's not explicitly religious. Actually, this one's kind of nice for us. Something from psychology, sociology, anthropology, history, and then show that you've applied it. And so on. I won't go through all 30, but this movement, so this has already been adopted by all the strategic partners. They're just figuring out how to implement it at this point. But these update to the language of the competencies and spelling out the exact criteria, that should be a good resource for unaffiliated chaplains who are looking to get credentialed, because it won't be so subjective, so much guessing, having to meet kind of criteria that were made by people that were from such a different perspective in your own. So it's not the main goal of the rubric, isn't to help unaffiliated chaplains, but I think a nice benefit of it is ensuring that unusual but equally legitimate perspectives can still meet the standards. So that's a good resource for us. So anyway, that's my review of these major areas and some challenges that I've seen and some resources. And I've kind of spoke for longer than I even meant to, Michael. I'm sorry, but I hope not quite half, but we got at least 20 minutes here just to see what people are asking. And I can see there's a bunch of chats. I just can't keep an eye on that and talk at the same time.
Fine. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you so much. This is extremely informative, and not just ideas and thoughts, but literally go here, click on this button. This is how to do it. That's so useful and helpful. So thank you for that.
Okay,
And also, I mean, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that I really appreciate your fairness in saying, humanist chaplaincy or relatively unaffiliated chaplaincy, it doesn't necessarily represent the future. It is what it is, right? Too often, I think, even very open-minded chaplains or organizations sort of think that the people that are different from them are eventually going to go away. Well, they're going to fade off into the sunset. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. So thank you for that enormous fairness there.
No, I think it's like, isn't that one? I mean, that's one project, like, or one question, right? Or general kind of goal is like try to make chaplaincy departments, chaplaincy as a field, the demographics look closer to the people we serve. that may not be the outcome is right if we're exactly pegging the proportion of each different kind of care recipient to make sure we have chaplains like them, but getting closer to that, it's probably worthwhile. And yeah, if we have a giant group of unaffiliated people that we serve, right?
Right.
But in chaplaincy, it's really tiny. So I don't know, that may be good reason for that. And it's one of these things where the flaws in your own argument better than anybody. But I do think we probably need more of this constituency represented in chaplaincy, or we won't provide as good a care to people like that.
Absolutely. Lots of good questions here. And if we can't get to all of them, everyone, I'm sorry, but we'll get to as many of them as we can. Melanie asks about your perspective as an educator. Melanie says, I was surprised to find how unfamiliar my educators have been about how to support unaffiliated students in pursuing board certified chaplaincy. I came to my current program well prepared, knowing what my options were, but another unaffiliated student in my program was told by an educator that they would, quote unquote, have a harder time. And I'm not sure this is true. So Melanie's pointing out another one of those barriers of what happens if you get an educator who doesn't quite get it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I can imagine those same words coming out of my mouth, to an unaffiliated student, that it's going to be hard. But as maybe for some other students too, and I hope that's more like realistic and protective, like helping steel them for some of the struggles and stuff, than it is discouraging or scaring them or scaring them off. So I don't know what that educator meant by that. I can't say, but it sounds like it didn't have a positive valence in the story you told from Melanie. But I think the verbatim itself is, that's like in some ways the heart and soul of CPE. Probably in some ways. I don't know if that's timeless, but it seems pretty central. I think the verbatim formats, that's a good place where I kind of tried to mention this briefly here, but as an educator, it's a great place for me to try to make my syllabus, make my curriculum more inclusive and welcoming. So giving a clear explanation for what I mean if we have a section about theological reflection, that I mean reflecting in terms of some tradition that you're in dialogue with that's meaningful to you. Or if we're talking about spiritual reflection, do I mean like some sense of in your own life story, some moment of like where I use like Ken Pargament, like some moment in your own life where you felt like you discovered or were discovered by the sacred, and how have you. So I try to do some translating, but I think that'll happen less and less. I think the ACP is changing that. So it's just like any change. There's going to be some supervisors who are quicker to kind of adapt to that, and some that are slower. But the ACP as a whole is like quite clear. They already decided that they want to be catching up. I'm seeing some of the stuff in the chat they want to catch up to. There's other countries where humanist chaplaincy is way more established. It's already there's foregone, but we're just catching up in that way. And America is different. So anyway, I don't know if I've answered the question.
Speaking on related to that is this question Deborah has that says, with regard to the competency or issue of pastoral authority, you said it would be a little bit different than the traditional understanding. Could you give an example for this other type of authority? And I think maybe there's some sort of translation involved there, but I think that's a really good question. Where does that authority come from?
Yeah. I definitely don't have like, the best answer to that, or there's certainly others. Just two that pop into my mind is one source of authority that's different than like a sense that, like, let's say that God called you to this work, or you're ordained, or you're sent. Like in the Netherlands, they have I'm indebted to George Hanzo for pointing me towards this resource where there's an organization in the Netherlands that was providing kind of their equivalency of endorsement that was for chaplains who were not sent by institutions. I don't know how to say that in Dutch, but that was the translation. So compared to, like, for example, if you are sent by an institution, there's a kind of authority that comes with that. Yeah. So if you don't have that, I'll say three things. One, just the sense that you're a chaplain in an organization that could be an imminent authority in and of itself. When you have a role, you're supposed to do that job, not more, not less. And so when I'm taking up my authority as a chaplain in this hospital, I'm doing my job. It's just taking up my role in a hierarchy in a system, not more than, not less than. If I have healthy issue, if I've worked with my authority issues enough to healthily take up that role, right? Another one too is kind of old fashioned. I mean, think about authority of the chaplain coming from more of like an inner sense of like connection to your own woundedness, your own spiritual process, your own sense that you're ministering to people as a fellow traveler, a fellow sufferer, a wounded healer. I mean, a lot of this like old fashioned, more inflated stuff. For me, it translates really well. I still think about myself that way. It's just like my daily devotion is less often, not never, less often prayer and the Bible per se, but I'd be like reading poetry, or again, really risking. I'm putting this seed out there one other time if somebody wants to try to, if there's any other baseball chaplains out there or whatever, like people who are really grounded in like some kind of practice around like a team sport or yoga or nature. Like if you have your practice and you get some of your authority as a spiritual care provider from that. I mean, I still believe in that. And the last thing is like, I will say that, I spent years fighting the endorsement requirement, and um, and I don't think I myself was saying so much that I thought the endorsement requirement was meaningless, but I think I had people advocating for me who were saying that. I heard that a lot, and it certainly was really frustrating for me to have what felt like being delayed for years and years and years towards certification because I didn't have an endorsement that was recognized. But I had an endorsement that wasn't recognized. You already know that story, Michael. I think I told in the other webinar. I had an endorsement from a poetry and peacemaking group, the Friends of William Stafford, that was not recognized. It didn't meet the requirements for board certification. But they still wrote me a letter that said they endorsed me as a chaplain. And the truth that doesn't fit as, it's maybe inconvenient or doesn't fit with the overall narrative, it meant a lot to me. When I did get endorsed, I remember the next shift that I had, and I felt different. I was sort of sent by an institution, not like by a religious institution, but it felt there is a kind of authority that came for that for me. I hope that people who go through even the equivalency process for endorsement, I guess my dream or hope is they feel something like that.
Alyssa asks a really good practical question, which is, do you have recommendations for how to choose a CPE site or educator if you identify as religiously unaffiliated? And I would hazard the very brief answer of talk to as many people as you can to sort of identify where that might be good. But other than that, what would you say to that, Joel?
That's good advice. I'd probably, just make the interview as two, if there's definitely a power asymmetry and balance in the interview process for CPE, right? But I mean, I would try to interview them. Try to take up your own authority to decide to figure out whether this is going to be a good program, a good fit for you, whether it would do you more harm than good. And one way of doing that might be to kind of come out as with some part of at least who you are that raises that concern about your religious belonging, and see how they react to that. And it could be that they react in a way that really challenges you, but you like that, in which case go for it. And it could be that they're just very straightforwardly supportive, go with it. But I won't, for reasons you'll understand, I won't, I'm going to gesture to this, but not get into some of the responses that I got over the years that they hurt. They weren't, I felt missed. I felt like they were very typical, stereotypical kind of answers to someone like me showing up. And those were still helpful. I didn't end up training in those programs, but they were fuel for the fire and for my own writing and thinking and work and motivating. So that's some of what comes to mind.
Rochelle has a really interesting question, and I think it's because this falls into that relatively unaffiliated category that you
Okay.
mentioned at the beginning. And so Rochelle says, do you have advice for aspiring chaplains who personally identify with a more widely recognized tradition like Judaism,
Yep.
but not seeking ordination or
Yep.
endorsement from them?
Yep.
Maybe looking for endorsement from someone else. So
Yep.
it's not just that you're coming from no tradition, but you're coming from one tradition to another.
Exactly. Well, I totally identify with that. So I'm Jewish. I just not have much of a Jewish education. I'm not a Jewish leader. I don't but it was certainly part of why I didn't want to. I think probably a lot of Jews feel this way. I didn't want to like convert or like give that up or go to some other group. So um, I found that that's part of what I liked about just where I ended up. Not to push religious natural association. That's certainly not my goal, but I liked that there was a group that was their project was to look at take a not supernatural, but supernatural, very natural approach to religious questions and themes and concerns and topics, including spiritual caregiving. And that it wasn't that I wouldn't have to give up any part of who I was, but that I could just I do identify with that project. It doesn't seem contradictory to my other parts of who I am, and yet they could support me, endorse me, help me meet that requirement. Yeah, I don't think the irony. I guess I'd come back and say, the irony that I ran into a few times, and which I hear in the question is, it's like as chaplains with a care recipient, we would welcome the complexity of their own identity, background, tradition, heritage. We wouldn't be like forcing, no, excuse me, I need to put something in the computer, so you just make it simple, or we would never do that. We would welcome. And so, there could be good professional reasons. Again, I'm open. Maybe there's really good reasons why we have to be more two-dimensional with ourselves than we are with the people we give care to. But I've also been drinking the Kool-Aid of CPE for so long in the parallel process, and that I end up feeling like we should find ways to institutionally recognize and credential chaplains in 3 dimensions just as much as we would with patients' families. So I would want to find a way. I guess if you had to give up something, and I don't know, but I would want to find a way for you to go be certified who you actually are in your own complexity, because as a chaplain, that's what you're going to be trying to honor in people anyway.
Varsha has a question, and I'm going to hazard an answer, and if it needs to be corrected, please do. Varsha says, is certification honored nationwide or specific state by state? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if your prospective employer doesn't want to recognize your certification, then it doesn't matter. But if you get, BCCI certified or whatever, that's really all you need. You don't need to be looking anywhere else to, you can move from California to New York or to Iowa, and as long as your employer is looking for certification, period, that's probably going to be okay. Unless, Joel, you're aware of people that are looking for certification that don't count BCCI.
No, I think it's pretty widely accepted, and I don't have any experience to think the opposite. Yeah. No.
Ooh, Allie has a really great question, and this is sort of having your ear to the ground, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this. Are employers looking to specifically hire humanist, relatively unaffiliated chaplains now to broaden diversity, or is it still a battle to get hired?
I honestly don't know. I literally don't know. That's a great question. I wonder. I think it'd be hard to even find out. In part because I think and you guys are working on this, Michael, with Amy Lawton, and trying to kind of surface this silent subgroup kind of in the field and stuff. But I don't know. We don't talk to each other that much and compare notes, and I don't know. I do not know what it's like out there for hiring. I kind of presumed, and what a part of what I set forward, but I could be wrong, is that there would be some barriers. It'd be more likely to be something that would be a barrier to getting employed than it would be a bonus. Like there's the risk, even if someone's looking to hire a humanist chaplain, I might be kind of cautious about that, just as I would with any kind of like, I don't know, there's always the risk of tokenism. It's the balance of representation and tokenism. So I don't know if I would want to be hired. I mean, I know for a fact I wouldn't want to be hired somewhere to be that character or whatever. But I don't know. That's a good empirical question. I don't know the answer, but if anybody figures out, it'd be Amy Lawton and Michael Skaggs and Wendy Cash and people at the lab probably.
I think, and I've already dismissed the question. I can't remember who answered it or who asked it, but
I think you said Allie.
Allie. You might want to look at the military. As long as you're endorsed, you would probably meet the qualifications to apply for military chaplaincy, and that's going to have a significant group of unaffiliated care recipients. And you might also want to think about higher education. that's going to have an enormous group of unaffiliated care recipients. The problem there is that higher education already has a hard enough time understanding what it is chaplains do, period, without having to comprehend a humanist chaplain at the same time. But you can look up, Greg Epstein at Harvard and being
Yes,
a
exactly.
humanist chaplain, and
Yeah.
there are examples out there. Um, Shannon, good question. Can you share a little more about what you said with getting some certification, then doing your hours later on? Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think what I mean is that they allow you to either when you can go for full board certification. The other thing I haven't talked much about, but let me just very quickly gesture to is like associate certification. There's sort of you don't necessarily have to go for full board certified chaplain. You should look at all the options that are out there from APC and others. You'll check out all the options. But just BCC from APC or BCCI, board certified chaplain, you got to have 2,000 professional hours. But what they let you do is if you meet all the other requirements, and you've written your essays, you've turned in your quasi verbatims, you've interviewed, and you've demonstrated that you're a competent chaplain, you just haven't amassed a full year of professional, like a full year of full-time work yet, they'll provisionally certify you. They're saying you seem like a good chaplain, and once you've racked up that's 2,000 hours, and it gets attested to just by your HR department or your boss or bosses if you're piecing together multiple part-time gigs. Once you have those 2,000 hours, then they convert your provisional PBCC certification into full BCC certification. So what I'm saying is, I think the general best advice is don't go for provisional certification. Season, get work. Like sometimes I have students who want to rush to get the provisional certification. I think that's generally not the best play, but it is for some people. And one group that I think it might be a pretty good option for is this group we're talking about, because especially if we're guessing right and there's some stigma in the hiring process, then having full board certification is probably going to help you. Excuse me, having provisional board certification is probably going to help you. It's good, all right.
William, great question about CPE if you don't have any CPE near you. There are a number of options and they're growing by year. I love to refer people to my colleague Danielle Buhuro at Sankofa CPE, with an organization like Sankofa, not a sponsor, by the way, I'm just recommending. With an organization like Sankofa, you can set up CPE wherever you are, provided there is an organization willing to host you. So the short answer, William, is yes, there are lots of ways to get CPE. Just Google remote CPE. There are lots of options that are coming up more and more to where geographic proximity is becoming less and less of an issue. I think maybe time for one more question here. Marissa says, can you speak more to the rubric you're building? Is there an estimated completion for the project?
It's in the implementation phase. It was accepted by the leadership of each of these big strategic partner groups, NACC, NAJC, APC. Am I forgetting one? No, those groups worked on it and have agreed on it. They're just figuring out how to implement it, when to roll it out. So I don't know what the timeline is on that exactly, but I'm hoping it's weeks to months, more than months to years, but it might be months to years.
Organizations' timelines are always sort of fungible. So
I really think the rubric is like the most important equity, justice intervention for our field. That's maybe I'll back off that, but I feel like saying something that's superlative about it. It's really, really, really important to reduce that subjectivity in the certification process, which is the big, gatekeeping moment of our field. But I think that also it's crucial to do it and do it as fast as possible, but also got to do it right. It should be rolled out well and thoughtfully. So I appreciate they're taking their time.
Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Joel. Thank you to the Religious Naturalist Association for sponsoring and for bringing this event. This is so important. And I think that maybe the biggest takeaway here is for people wondering, can I be a chaplain if I don't identify as anything in particular? The answer is yes, absolutely yes. The historic structures are set up in a different way, but there are ways to navigate them. And I think Joel has given us a lot to think about here as you try to navigate them. And I would just say to everybody, as you have questions as you go through some of these processes. By all means, reach out to the lab. We're happy to find resources however we can. We're a very small staff. The lab is not very many people, but to the extent that we're able to, we're always happy to help. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.